Welcome in to another edition of the Noon Dish. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. A lot of wheels turning today, a lot of hamsters running on their wheels to keep everything rolling in the world of IC. Um, just had to post something on another board. Don Callahan's been working on a ton of stories. Everybody, like we say, Don, there's just simply no off season. What is it about the
Do you think
summer commitment
people
season?
get tired of that cliche? I know
Do
it's
they?
our I don't know. Do you think?
I don't think so.
I'm not a big cliche person, but I mean it's correct. I'm not saying that you're not correct. It is correct.
Top five cliches we don't like.
That that would be a good one, but I would definitely need at least next week.
You know what my favorite is?
What's that?
It is what it is. But I like it if you
Well,
say it.
that
It
it's such
is
a
what it is.
it's such a lazy thing that's thrown out there when you don't have anything else to say. That's what the
Oh,
problem with
really?
that is.
Okay. So next week's top five cliches. You either like them or don't. Just top five cliches. Book it, mark it, whatever you want to say. That is our top five next week. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com for sponsoring this and many other Inside Carolina podcasts. Shout out for everybody that makes this work. Shout out if you're listening on the audio version. That means John Siegley put in the work to get it to the podcast feeds, and just something to look forward to if you're on the audio version. If you're not on the audio version, either way, the Malcolm Ziglar live from Fuquay Varina High School show that we did, I guess, on was it Monday? Don and I did on Monday. Will be
Yeah.
tacked on to the end of this on the audio people. If you want to watch it on the video, the YouTube is posted. We also did a live from Jordan Shipp's commitment with John Bowman. Uh, Don's phone is blowing up today, so it's just a hectic, busy time. Uh, who was our MVP last week, Don?
Cold ascending.
Cold Ascending,
Yeah.
a newbie, at least
Yes.
somebody, a name we had not seen, but they earned top. I think early on somebody got on us a little bit, maybe rightfully so. Said we need to recognize new people. Well, there you go, Cold Ascending MVP of last week. So
And a
shout
bunch
out
of former MVPs are in here. I got Sean Crowley, or is it Crowley?
Crowley.
Um, Alan Mitten, former MVP. Was it Mark Kinston was MVP? Preston, I
Yeah,
think, was MVP. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong
it's
with any of this stuff. So a lot
it
of
is.
MVPs in here.
It's like the Walk of Fame
That's
here.
right. The Walk of Fame for the noon dish.
And shout out and to the other folks that are in, there's 40 plus people in here now. Get in the chat. Get in the chat, drop questions, comments, rate us, review, smash that like button, like some people like to say.
Speaking
Uh,
of cliches,
yeah, just doing all that stuff. It helps us out. Give us a review, hop on the message boards, get a chat going on the message boards, whatever you want to do to interact with us. It's a fun time. Uh, are you going to the soccer game tonight, Don?
considering I don't know what you're talking about, no.
Okay.
What soccer game? Is it
There's a
the one in
Chelsea
Keenan?
and Wrexham or
So
whatever
it's
you say.
tonight?
It's tonight in Keenan Stadium. Yes, sir.
How much are tickets?
I think they've gone down significantly. I think when they went on sale, lowers maybe 150, 160 bucks a
So it's
piece.
Crowley. Crowley. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
Crowley.
you.
Oh, my
It's gone
bad.
down to how much?
I saw people on the message board selling them for, four for a couple $100. So it's gone down significantly. I don't know how it breaks down as far as upper level, lower level, whatever. I'll be sitting in the end zone.
So you'll be there.
I'm going. I'm taking my soccer minded son, and we are going up there. Did not pay the ridiculous prices for parking around the stadium. So paid the $5 to hop on the parking ride,
Okay.
and we will hit the parking ride at the Friday Center and go to the soccer game. Check it out. It'd be pretty cool, I think.
Yeah,
Hoping
I
that they manage it better than the Stadium Series hockey game.
did you go to that?
I did.
Oh, what'd
And
you think of that?
that was awesome. I
Okay.
mean, a lot of people got torqued up because it was at State and they hyped up NC State and all that stuff. I thought it was amazing. The only thing I don't understand about that, and I'm hoping this is not what happens tonight in Chapel Hill, is I've been to plenty of state football games. I've been to plenty Hurricane hockey games and have never had a problem parking, getting in and
Mhm.
out of this stadium or anything like that. The Stadium Series hockey game was the biggest cluster of a parking nightmare that I've ever seen in my life.
So
It
I
took us 2 hours to go less than a mile into the stadium. Now, once we got there, it was fine, but
mhm.
the lines to get into the stadium themselves, just a complete cluster. So hoping that they don't switch up too much tonight in Chapel Hill and create just a disaster of a logjam everywhere.
So speaking of clusters, so I went and saw the Savannah Bananas on Saturday, and for
I want
whatever
to go.
reason, even though it was in the Durham Bulls Park, they did open seating. So what that did was the gates opened at 5:30, and we tried to get there around 5. We were a little late, but fortunately, my uncle, who I went with, and his family, they had arrived early, but there was a huge line, and it wasn't like an organized line. It was just basically just a crowd of people kind of funneling in, and it
Mhm.
was an absolute nightmare trying to grab seats and making sure you could sit next to each other. We actually had a big group, of people. We had probably 20 plus people, but we ended up only sitting with my uncle's family and my family, just because of just how much of a cluster it was. And then it got even worse when it started to rain because people started leaving their seats and then people started stealing seats. It was just an absolute mess, all because they did open seating, which was disappointing. But I really loved it. But I think my wife, who does not like sports, loved it way more than I did because it's definitely a goofy sort of thing. I know that that was something you were interested in. I try to see if we can get additional seats, but or additional tickets for you, but
It
we
did
didn't
not
have any
work
extra.
out.
Did not
Yeah.
have any extra
I
tickets.
wanted to go check them out, but I got on there. I told you I got on Ticketmaster or StubHub or whatever it was. It was like $250 for standing room only seats, which is
Yeah,
insane. Um, but
yeah,
yeah,
it
I
was.
wish I would have. To Matt Windorf's comment in the chat, I wish I'd have waited to buy or excuse me, soccer tickets. But
We got
it
them.
is what it is.
My uncle bought them a little over a year ago, or I'm sorry, a little less than a year ago, and they were $25 each. So they just
Nice.
went up just because and I think what initially happened was I think they was only supposed to have a game on Friday, and that sold out so quickly that they did Saturday also. We went for the Saturday game. But,
Yeah.
I definitely considered the soccer game. I didn't know it was tonight, but I definitely considered it, but I knew immediately there's so many soccer junkies that it was just gonna be, tickets were just gonna be a pain in the butt, so I didn't even really seriously consider it.
Well, I mean, they sold out in like 30 minutes or something ridiculous, but now the secondary market's been flooded with a bunch,
Okay.
and so anyway, you could go if you want, but we are getting there fairly early, parking at the park and ride, catching the bus in there, and checking it out, see what it's all about. Natural grass in Keenan Stadium, and so they have. I don't know if they laid it on top of the turf or they pulled up the turf and laid it down. Either way, one game, natural grass. I wish I could figure out what they're doing with that grass after the fact, so they could. I'd drive up there and get me a couple pallets to put in the yard. But anyway, I also heard that Lionel Messi is with Miami now, and
Mhm.
that they're going to require teams to put in grass when he comes to town. I can't imagine that's true, but maybe it is. Anyway, we're here to talk about North
Yeah, we're
Carolina
getting off
football
topic. There's
recruiting.
a lot of people who are angry now.
Yeah, so if you want to ask questions for Don, drop them in here. Let's get into it, Don. It was a busy week. You and I did the lives. You had a ton of content on the Jordan Shipp commitment, Malcolm Ziglar commitment. There was supposed to be one other that was moved till later to a grandmother's birthday. But Don, let's back up to Sunday and Jordan Shipp's commitment. We've talked about it. Your work's well documented, but that's a big deal for North Carolina, I think, to secure that commitment and then to follow it up the next day with another big in-state commitment. Uh, just sort of comment on both of those, how they got to be North Carolina Tar Heels.
Oh, well, with Shipp, it was a situation where North Carolina offered him, I guess it was, I feel like it might have been during last football season. And, he had, like a top 6 at one point, but ultimately this came down to North Carolina, Michigan, and NC State. And really, and he'll tell you, it came down to Michigan and North Carolina, and that Michigan actually gave North Carolina a pretty hard battle. Although I think, he says it was even throughout, but didn't make his decision until that final official visit, which was North Carolina, and made the decision then. Obviously, he wanted to have a ceremony, so he waited until the ceremony to announce it publicly. With Malcolm, I think it was always going to be North Carolina's to lose sort of situation, just because, and we actually ran the story we talked about. Probably, I think it got posted like a couple minutes before we just went on air, about how him and his family took part in the military homecoming 10 years ago, when his father was supposed to come home in December. His mother found out that he was going to come home a little earlier, and so she decided to reach out to UNC to do a homecoming sort of thing to surprise the kids, and that's what they did. There's video up on Twitter. You can actually watch what happened, which is pretty cool. We were able to look back in our archives, and we had photos of it, which is amazing. It's one of the times that we're happy that Jim Hawkins just takes a lot of photos. But yeah, I think that was always in the back of their head, even though Malcolm didn't mention it to me until we did the commitment story. Him and I did commitment interview. He never mentioned it to me, which is typical. Kids just forget about those sort of things. But I think throughout, that was always going to be, it was North Carolina was always the team to beat. South Carolina, like Michigan with Shipp, South Carolina put up a battle, and his mom admitted that, and so did Malcolm. And, to be honest, I don't know this to be fact, or I don't know, like, no one from Malcolm's side has admitted this, and I haven't asked, just because it's just really not, the answer really doesn't matter all that much. But it would not shock me if he had committed to both South Carolina and North Carolina in early June to kind of secure his spots with both schools, because he knew he was taking those official visits later. Because from my understanding, South Carolina was, I don't know if off guard is the right word to use, but there were a lot of people, a lot of commits for South Carolina, a lot of people in South Carolina that were under the impression that he was going to pick South Carolina. And there were some that morning who had said to me, "Hey, I heard he actually flipped from South Carolina to North Carolina." And I'm thinking in my head, from what I know, he had committed to North Carolina a long time ago, and this was done. But yeah, so it wouldn't surprise me if he had committed to both of those schools just to kind of lock things up, and then ultimately, took his official visits to both those schools and Notre Dame. North Carolina again was that final official visit, which we talked about it a bunch, and making the decision, that North Carolina was ultimately going to be the spot.
It's interesting. The schools put a lot of pressure on these kids to make a decision, and you talk about secure a spot, and I know that the discussions on the message boards have been interesting about it. They shouldn't call them commitments. They should just call them placeholders and things like that. But one thing I did find interesting in watching the live streams that you did with Ziglar and you and John Bowman did with Shipp is there was a lot of opposing fans in there. And
Yeah.
in the Ziglar one, especially, the South Carolina people were quite confident
Yeah.
that he was about to break the Tar Heels' heart when he announced, and so that was always interesting. I mean, you had at least as many South Carolina folks as you had North Carolina folks in that live chat. But ultimately, it comes down to proximity and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, it would not surprise me either way. I know a lot of times it's difficult to tell these coaches no.
Yeah, yeah, because
And
you
you've
establish.
talked to recruits, and they say
Yeah,
that a lot, right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, think about this. I mean, yes, let's take Malcolm. He developed a very strong relationship with Charlton Warren, but he also established some very strong relationships. And his mom mentioned this also at South Carolina. You know,
Mhm.
close to as strong, or maybe as strong. And so, yes, it's difficult to tell somebody who who's invested a lot of time into you, into your child, and tell them, hey, this is not going to be the choice. So that's pretty hard. There's a question here from where was it at?
We're talking about John Fox's question.
Okay, so actually, I didn't. I'm just seeing John Fox's question now. Do you want to pull that up?
Yeah.
How common is it for kids to verbally commit to multiple schools? So here's the thing. And this is why I have such an issue with people using the term silent commitment. I could tell you that the coaches I interact with pretty frequently do not consider, if it's not out there in the public, they do not consider it a commitment, which means they're still recruiting for that position, for that spot. So if they don't consider a commitment, we shouldn't. And this is a pretty good example of why, if we're running under, if we're going hypothetically and saying that Malcolm committed to 2 schools, I don't know that to be fact. I know that he committed to North Carolina. He's admitted that. My sources support that. I'm just saying that there's definitely some pretty good evidence that he could have also done it with South Carolina. But this is why the whole silent commitment thing bothers me a little bit when people use it. Also, there are people who come out and try to pretend like they have information when they really don't. And the best way for them to do that is say, oh, well, this kid's a silent, knowing that you can't disprove it because it's a silent commitment because it's not out there. And so that's what I think it irritates a lot of other posters too, because a lot of people will say, oh, this kid's going to commit this weekend. And then when he doesn't, and they say, well, he did, he just a silent. So that's the irritating part. But so to me, if a kid, let's take it into dating terms, Tommy. All right. So let's take Tommy back. Tommy, how old are you again?
50 something.
All right. So let's go back. God, we're going to have to go back. What? We're going to have to back
Can we use a hypothetical person here?
35. No, we're going to use you. 30.
Okay.
Can we go back 35 years? We need to go back further than that. We need to go back
I mean,
35
I would
years.
have been like a preteen if we go back too much further than that, but that's
All right.
sufficient.
All right. So let's go back 35 years. You meet a girl, you go out a couple dates, you guys talk about being boyfriend and girlfriend, and she says to you, okay, that's cool, but you cannot tell anyone that we're boyfriend and girlfriend. And next weekend, I'm going to go on a date with Ross Martin, and the weekend after that, I'm going to go on a date with John Bowman. Are you going to feel like you and her are boyfriend and girlfriend?
And negative.
Exactly. So let's be realistic about this. If a kid is a quote unquote silent, but he's still visiting other schools, he's not committed to that school.
Right.
Now, if you take a situation like Jordan Shipp, who commits that final weekend at North Carolina, but wants to have a ceremony, the same thing happened with Keenan Jackson and a couple other guys. They're not making any other visits to any other schools. That's cool. And they don't even use the term silent. That's just not a term that's used. That makes sense. They're not visiting any schools. Their recruitment's done. They just want to do it a certain way and announce it to the public a certain way. And there's everything cool like that. But if you're still taking visits and all of that, you're not committed to a school.
I 100% agree. This is a lot of cliches coming in here. My favorite thing is when people have information that this is the gold standard, and like you said, they pop up and say, "Oh well, the kids, teenagers, they change
Yeah.
their minds," and all that kind of stuff.
Which happens, but it's just there's so many people that just want to come out and act like they have information when they really don't, or maybe they heard rumors or this and that, and so they're trying to cover up their tracks a bit. I think the one that really irked me was the Jaquarius Conley one, which I was more on top of that recruitment than anyone else because I had a good relationship with his dad, who ended up being a regular poster on Inside Carolina, and also Jaquarius made multiple visits there to his school, and there was a poster or two who said he had silently committed well before he had, and it was just kind of frustrating because I was like, hey, this is what this person's saying, and Jaquarius was like, no, I haven't done anything. I don't know what that's coming from. I'm still visiting other schools, and this is well before I actually committed. But anyway, there was another question too that actually grabbed I think it was Derek Morrison. Do you want to highlight that? It's right underneath John Fox's.
Okay, I'm getting there. Okay, here you go.
Oh, to answer John's question, because he asked how many kids I mean, probably not too frequently, but I'm sure that there are situations where kids try to lock up spots like that. There's definitely kids who try to lock up spots. Multiple schools, maybe. It's just so hard to quantify. But anyway, so moving on to Derek.
I'm gonna freely admit, I'm telling everybody I'm coming.
Well, it's a smart move because
Yeah.
there are kids. If you follow this not just from a North Carolina perspective, but a lot of different schools, there's a lot of kids who had official visits scheduled to a lot of different places, and then if you notice, after that first weekend, some visits started to get canceled. Then after the second weekend, even more visits started to get canceled. And there was very few kids who ended up taking all of the official visits they had scheduled because either they had committed somewhere else or their spot at a particular school that they were scheduled to officially visit later on in June was filled by another commitment. So it's smart to try to lock it, especially if you really want North Carolina, you really want South Carolina, whatever it may be. It's a smart move,
Yep.
if you're looking out for yourself. All right, so on to Derek's. You want to read the question?
Yep. Shipp, Derek Morrison working on MVP today. Shipp and K. Jackson seem to think the upcoming class will be top 10. Is that a possible reality?
Mathematically, no. The best
based
thing
on the numbers, based on the
numbers, yes.
calculator and all that kind of stuff.
If you were to go now, I think some fans, some posters just take what these recruits say too much, hold it too strongly. I'm looking at you, Derek, from the Tar Pit Premium message board. You got to really take with a grain of salt. You got to remember.
Is it the same Derek or not?
Oh, that's interesting. It might be.
I don't know.
Is it spelled the same? Here, let me go back. Is it spelled the same? Yeah, it might be. All right. So, Derek, let us know if you're the same Derek on the message boards. Anyway, these are high school kids.
Yep.
And you have high school or former high school kids, so
that hurts my heart a little bit.
But you know how these high school kids are. You've been around their friends. You overhear their goofy conversations. My wife and I went out for ice cream last night, and we were sitting on the patio, and a group of high school kids came out with ice cream also, and we're just listening to conversations and shaking our heads. It just blows your mind with these kids. And then social media, as I've said before, Twitter, as I said before, is not the social media platform that they use regularly. They only use it for recruiting. So you got to take what they say with a grain of salt. Also, they don't know how certain things work, and they're prone to being tricked into different things. But mathematically, and you can easily do this by pulling up 247's class calculator, something I use very frequently. All you got to do is go to the underneath. If you go to IC, and then you go underneath the football recruiting, and you click on where is it, class calculator, and then you could throw in any recruit in there. You could throw in all of the recruits who are left for North Carolina to that are actively recruiting. You could throw in Alex Taylor, Javaris Green, and Jonathan Paylor, and there's really no one else that North Carolina is really recruiting. But if you want to just kind of throw someone in there randomly, also, you will have to really get very, 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 very multiple varies creative in order to get North Carolina really into the top 15. Mm-hmm. Just because, I mean, really, where's North Carolina? I think they were 20th, but I know with all of it, this is the time of year where it's hard to kind of, let's see. So they're still 20th. And obviously, if they land Javaris, if they land Alex Taylor, that's going to move them up. But, a lot of these schools that they will pass, Tennessee has 16 commits. Miami has 18. Yeah. Arkansas has 16. Texas, which is behind North Carolina, 14. Oklahoma behind North Carolina, 14 commits. South Carolina, 13 commits. A lot of these schools don't have a whole lot of commits yet. And once they start adding commits, they're going to pass North Carolina. And so I believe that this class will probably finish very similar to last class, which was what it was still a top 30 class.
Yep.
So that's where we're looking. North Carolina is not going to come anywhere close to a top 10 class, even if it just absolutely just blows it out of the water. Steals Paler, lands Taylor, and lands Green, and then you throw in some sort of mystery recruit. I don't believe that there is a mystery recruit out there, but if you want to believe that there is one, throw them in there. Pull a random 5-star. It's just not going to get North Carolina up into the top 15.
Yeah, I mean, and look, it's a numbers game, and the way the system is, the bottom line is for North Carolina fans to worry about is the stars and all that stuff matter, and perception matters. Don and I have talked about prestige and perception and all that, but I've said before, it's a chicken and egg type thing. You got to win with what you have, and you're bringing in guys that you believe can win. Well, that produces wins, that produces more recruits, that produces higher ranked classes, and so on and so forth. But North Carolina certainly getting the folks they have targeted, Shipp and Ziglar, are one of them. Let me ask you this question, and this is something that I don't know if you can answer or not. Hills 365. What's the reason for 247 dropping all the commitments to 3 stars other than Ziglar?
So I haven't exactly looked back, but I do not believe that 247 has dropped them. I think what has happened, and what you may have noticed, is that for whatever reason, 247, and it used to be set up to where in most places of the website, when you would go and look at a ranking or whatever, you would see the composite ranking. And then the 247 ranking, which is completely separate, or I shouldn't say completely separate, is different, would be secondary, right? And so just for those who don't understand, the composite is basically taking the average of 247's ranking, Rivals ranking, On3's ranking, and ESPN's ranking to come out with a number. And the hope is that when you combine those 4, and this is actually a statistical sort of theory, or maybe theory is probably the wrong word. This has been proven the more you kind of aggregate together, the more efficient the ranking will be, and that's what the composite is a combination of those 4. For whatever reason, 247 is starting to more highlight its own rankings and showcase that. And so that's what you're seeing more frequently where you're going throughout the website. So the rankings really haven't changed, or hasn't changed that much, to be completely honest. All of them are basically the same as what they have been. Although I think they may have done an update a couple weeks ago. But what you've been seeing lately is they're just changing the website. So
And just so folks are clear when they're looking at this stuff, if you're on Tar Pit Premium message board, you can go to football recruiting and find it there, right? But where you need to be, if you're a North Carolina fan, is you need to be on the Tar Pit Premium message board. The last pinned topic is Don's recruiting board that is updated by Don and Inside Carolina. And if you look at those rankings, and I'm looking at the commitments, you still have several 4 stars in there, and that's the composite one.
yeah,
Am I correct there?
yeah.
And so
I
that
use
is,
a composite. That was when we first started. That's what they were kind of pushing, and so I didn't know that they were going to push the 247 much, but I kind of like the idea of combining the 4. I'm not a huge fan of ESPN's. I feel like when I look at them, they're just, I don't know. I don't know what they see sometimes, but I know that those guys actually watch film, and I kind of welcome the outside the box thinking on some of it, and I think it's cool, and I think it adds a good little element. On3 I think does a good job. Rivals, they definitely try to do a good job. They definitely, anytime they get something right, they definitely will tell you about it. But really, and they've done a lot of research on this, and yes, it's most of the research is done by 247 themselves, but their rankings end up, and they use the NFL draft as a grading system, 247s end up being the most accurate.
So let me ask another question on recruiting, and we're talking with Don Callahan. It is the noon dish. Well, let me do this. Let me do Johnny T-shirt again. If you're in town for the soccer game we talked about earlier, stop by Johnny T-shirt on East Franklin Street. Load them up. Load up all the gear you need. Football season is like literally around the corner. Johnny T-shirt takes care of you, and all the gear you need for football season, for tailgating, whatever you need. And it's not just football season. They've got everything: basketball jerseys, baseball stuff, NIL stuff, anything you want. They've been great friends of Inside Carolina. They've been great friends of Inside Carolina subscribers because you get 10% off if you do it there. And they're forever having sales plus that 10%. I mean, you can get stuff. It's not free, but it's as close to free and good quality as you can get shopping at Johnny T-shirt. And their Tar Heels there, alumni owned and operated, been there forever. And check them out in person or online. Great customer service. National guys will pay the bills on the audio version. And don't forget, if you're listening to the audio version later, Don and I on the Malcolm Ziglar commitment will be tacked on after this one. But we'll be right back after a national break. Got a couple more questions for Don on this recruiting stuff we like to talk about on the Noon Dish. Don Callahan there. I'm Tommy Ashley. It's Inside Carolina's Noon Dish. I feel like I was a good read, wasn't it?
That's that was a very good read. I was impressed. But we have not talked about a top 5 for this podcast, and we're 30 minutes in.
Well, you know what I forgot?
What?
Is it top 5 actresses?
Well, we don't have to necessarily do that. I was thinking something would be easy that we can get everybody to do is, why don't we do top 5 home games from a recruit standpoint? Like, if you were Pat Sudis, what would be in order the home games that you would try to get the most recruits to? So this season, just look at the home games for whatever justification you want to make. Maybe you want it an easy win. Maybe you want a competitive game. Maybe you want a great opponent, attractive opponent, whatever it is. Top 5 home games that you want in order you're targeting recruits to come to. Does that make sense?
5, yes, sir. Top 5 North Carolina home games this season. For the big recruiting weekends. If you could decide, rank them from 1 to 5. There's, of course, 7 home games. With Campbell and Duke wrapping up the season in November. Top 5 home games you would expect to see the most recruits at if you were Sudis and the folks that line all that up. All right, let me get back to the questions. We will go through the top 5 when we get out of here. I lost the one I was going to ask you. Here you go. Preston from Greensboro. Don, have you ever thought you knew where a player would commit the day of and were surprised? I know one, and you were out in dang on Wizard of Oz territory.
Which one?
Arthur Brown. Was it Arthur Brown that you went all
the
way to Kansas?
I didn't. So, yeah. So this was a long time ago. I don't think that we knew. We just thought it was a good enough chance. And at that time, Arthur Brown was the number 1 recruit. And, it just was like this huge deal. So, yeah. And I'm sure that the timing of it worked to where there wasn't a whole lot going on. And, Buck and Ben made the call to send me out there. I didn't know. So there's a lot of them that a lot of people are like, oh, well, you're going, so that means North Carolina's going to get them. No, that just means that we don't think North Carolina is not going to get them. You know what I mean?
You don't know that it's out of the question. You don't know that Carolina's still in it if you're there.
Yeah. So, but to your point, that's probably the closest thing, because I had initially planned I was going to be there a day after, and that was going to be, and I had it kind of set up. I was going to spend time with Arthur and his the negative connotation slang for his handler, but it was his I forget the term that was used for him. Anyway, I was supposed to hang out with them the next day and then fly out the day after that. But once he picked Miami, I grabbed my recorder off the desk, jumped in my rental car, called Ben, and he said, yeah, let's try to get you a flight home earlier. And that's what I did. I was able to get a flight earlier. So, yeah.
Did you see Dorothy while you were out there?
I did not, But the one thing I do remember, so you're trying to maximize being out there, and so definitely different, and so I noticed, this was when newspapers were still kind of sort of a thing, and I noticed there was no coverage of this announcement. And so I called the sports editor and I was like, hey, and this is just, I'm just completely naive to this. I'm just like, hey, just wondering why. I mean, is this not a big deal for you guys? I could see how it would come across as disrespectful, like kind of calling him out. And the guy said, first thing he said was, is this off the record or on the record? And I said, well,
I
okay.
just called you. I'm not
Yeah, I'm
reporting
just calling
anything.
you. And he's like, I was like, well, I mean, what do you want? And he said, off the record. I was like, all right. And then he just ripped me about how they've been covering this kid for weeks and weeks and weeks. And, and it was unnecessary for them to do a whole lot, on this day. They were gonna cover it, it was gonna be in their newspaper the next day after the announcement and yada yada yada. And I was like, look, I've never been I've never been to Wichita before, and I'm just trying to get some, trying to do something to kind of heighten it up. So it was just trying to get some feedback from you guys. So he ultimately did go on the record and gave me some quotes about just, what they were thinking, what they were hearing, and all that sort of stuff. And we kind of ran that. I don't know if we did a post or whatever it may be, but yeah, yes, that's the one thing I remember from that.
So look at this follow up right here. Let me show you something. And you don't have to comment if you don't want to.
Yeah.
That's the lead into it. Hold on a second. Hold please. Great radio here.
Well, the question, we got to read the question. What's the feeling of Jonathan Paler? So, as of today, I don't know. As of today, that's not the plan, but this one just does seem like it's getting a little weird. And I mean, I got to feel like it's still South Carolina. And I think that if it's not South Carolina, it would be NC State. But I don't know. It's getting weird. And some of it might be one of those situations where once the dust settles, he picks South Carolina and we all look back and be like, well, duh. You know what I mean? But like right now, it's just kind of in that moment where I'm sure if it's still South Carolina, I'm sure that he's feeling like, okay, everybody knows it's South Carolina, and so I don't have a lot of buzz. So how do I create some buzz? Let me kind of throw out some like whatever to make it seem like that this is not decided, this is not done yet. So I don't know. I mean, a lot of these, my focus right now, and this is not like a Bill Belichick thing, but it really is honest to God truth. My focus right now is the Alex Taylor announcement, which is prior to that one. And, I'll gather intel leading up to him. It's still like 2-3 weeks away. So there's
a
plenty of
lifetime.
time. To be honest, for that week right there, I do a lot of, I like to like just knock out a bunch of high school practices. And and typically that requires me to, spend a few days in Charlotte, spend a few days in Greensboro. There's not outside of Jonathan Paler, there's not a whole lot of recruits in that central North Carolina area. So I really would not it would kind of mess up my vibe.
Wow. Don't mess with Don Callahan's vibe.
Yeah.
No, I think the moral of the story here, folks, is stay tuned.
Yes.
Never know.
Very good. Very good, Tommy.
Yes. You gotta keep the hype on here. Let me ask you, this is kind of not really direct recruiting, but it was something that was a recruiting process. KM Shires asked, expectations of Jacoby Criswell to start at Arkansas. When you were covering that recruitment, were you surprised he committed to North Carolina, or how was that recruitment, the Criswell recruitment? We'll have a let's go back.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember back. So first of all, an absolutely awesome kid. Absolutely awesome kid. He actually initiated contact with me way back when it first started. His recruitment first started. Let me know that he was going to, UNC's big junior day event, which I believe was the Duke basketball game, I think. And that kind of set up my antennas because I was aware of him, but that immediately says, okay, this is a major target if they invited him to this. And then so I double checked and I was told that he was a major target. And then and I think they offered him shortly thereafter. It was always awesome to deal with. And then didn't he I shouldn't be asking you this. I should know this.
I know.
I have a terrible memory, but if I remember correctly, he committed, took official visit to North Carolina, or took an official visit to Arkansas, and then one to North Carolina. And it was Arkansas. If I remember, this was kind of late in the process. I'm trying to pull up Criswell. I'm sorry. Was not anticipating this being the topic, to be completely honest.
Hey, you got to. You got to be able to roll on the fly.
If it was, and if it's slowly coming back to me because, as I said, terrible memory. And it was when Pittman was hired, and Arkansas wasn't recruiting him, and then Pittman was hired, and that's when Arkansas got involved because they needed a quarterback. Let's see. All right. Okay. So yeah. So he committed. Yeah. So. Okay. All right. So yes. So this is back when official visits were taking place in December. He committed to North Carolina in June, and then he took, if I remember correctly, I don't have this in my notes, which is terrible, but I remember he took an official to Arkansas and then took one to North Carolina. And then I remember talking to him after that North Carolina official visit, and he was like, well, duh, yeah, I'm going to stick with North Carolina. This is, yeah, it's not even, it's the official visit. Arkansas is not on, or maybe he just visited Arkansas.
Well, Eric Miller in the chat says Chad Morris's kid was committed there as a quarterback.
That's right. And that's right. And then Chad Morrison that's why Arkansas didn't mess with him. And then so once Morrison was fired, Pittman came in, they needed a quarterback. Yeah. And so they got involved, but it was too little too late. Longo established a really strong relationship with Criswell and his family. But I remember talking to him after the UNC official visit, and he was like, yeah, of course I'm sticking with North Carolina. It was almost like matter of factly sort of thing.
Right. Interesting. As far as what happens at Arkansas now, I'll be freely honest. I have no idea, nor do I spend a ton of brain power. You want to see guys that were North Carolina Tar Heels go, you want to see what kind of success or not that they have when they go somewhere else, out of curiosity, out of sort of analyzing the development process. Were they hit or misses when they were at Carolina? If you see a guy that came in highly ranked at Carolina and he transfers out and drops down a level or whatever, that's something that's always interesting to me. But as far as what they do afterwards, I think the general consensus for Carolina fans should be you wish them health, wish them success. And I know that's what they want to happen. Within the building is those guys were part of the family. They go on somewhere else. You wish them success, but you move on with what you've got. Don, this has been a fun show, and there's some new people in here. Shout out to Lewis Bass, a newbie in the Noon Dish. Appreciate you joining us. But if you haven't had an opportunity to get your top five home games this season, the 2023 season, that if you were in charge of recruiting, would you want the recruits to be at? Or to be at that game. So list your top five games. I can tell you that it appears that Miami is running away, and it makes sense because that's probably the best home game on the schedule. Miami is running away with the lead at the moment. But Don, any other you mentioned Alex Taylor's commitment. What else is coming up on the, when we get back together next week, what might we be talking about news-wise that could go down this week? Anything on your radar?
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot. I think we're kind of, July is the month for announcements, and beyond that, it's pretty. There's not a whole lot going on recruiting wise. No visits until the very end of the month, and that's only for like less than a week. So really, between now and then, you always got to expect the unexpected. But between now and then, I don't anticipate anything happening that we will talk about on next Wednesday, but that will be the Wednesday prior to Alex Taylor's announcement. So I'm sure that we will get into that a whole lot.
Yeah, that'll be the big one to watch, of course. And let me ask you, Don, from a recruiting standpoint, and I see a lot, I've paid attention a lot more since I've been doing these with you. And I've got, guys hitting me up or Twitter or social media, following and all that kind of stuff. But if I'm a high school recruit right now and I don't have the offers that I want, and I'm a 2024 guy, what am I doing now? What can I do now other than just ball out in my senior season to sort of help me? What's that process for a young man who maybe feels like he's overlooked and hasn't got the offers he wants? I mean, is there any? I guess camp season's over
Yeah.
because high school seasons are come.
Yeah.
Um, how
So
many kids get noticed now
yeah,
for their coming class?
for Power Five, especially major Power Five schools, that door is all but closed. Maybe you get into a situation where you can rely on a really good senior season to maybe catch on with it with a coaching staff who is now or a school that just fired their coach, and maybe that depletes their commitment list and then opens some opportunities up for their new coaching staff to try to look at you. But really beyond that, I mean, you're looking at lower level schools, group of 5 schools, and beyond that, which is great. If you can get your college paid for, then do it. There's no shame in playing for a group of 5 school. There's no shame in playing for an FCS school. So, but if your dream is to play at a Power 5 school, it's probably best to, still keep plugging along and doing what you got to do, but you probably need to shift your focus a little bit more and more of your conversations more to, group of 5 schools and FCS schools.
Yeah, the process, and somebody, and Jeff in the chat said, try for a preferred walk on. Explain sort of the process of preferred walk ons for a school like Carolina, but other schools do it as well. And what exactly, and I think we may have talked about this several weeks ago, but what exactly does that process look like from a college perspective and then from a kid's perspective?
So most walk-ons are not, and there are exceptions, okay? But most walk-ons are not like, if we were going to list it in tiers and you say Power 5 guy, Group of 5 guy, FCS guy, Division 2 guy, Division 3 guy, most walk-ons fall into that Division 2, maybe FCS territory.
Mm-hmm.
Because then from a scholarship standpoint, you might not be getting any money, or you might not be getting not a lot of money, especially if it's an out-of-state school, to where it's going to offset. You might as well just stay for an in-state if North Carolina's in-state. So, so that's what that kind of. So it's not like North Carolina or whatever school it may be are offering preferred walk-on opportunities to guys who would otherwise go to group of 5 schools. Now, there are situations where kids just wants to play for a school, and if they cannot get a scholarship, they're going to try to walk on. Yes, it happens. The other, I guess, special situation is specialists. A lot of programs still will not offer a specialist at all, or won't offer a specialist out of high school. They require them to earn the scholarship on campus in practice and that sort of thing. And so that's a completely different ball game. North Carolina actually just picked up a preferred walk-on long snapper, in-state kid from Cannon School. I think it was a week or two ago. And so he'll come in with his hope is to, earn that scholarship sort of thing. And that's same for kickers, a lot of kickers. Now, if you're an elite guy, North Carolina's obviously putting a scholarship guy at kicker from Woodbury Forest. So there's those situations, but they most likely will bring in a couple other specialists, including some kickers for depth and for competition purposes.
Yeah, and you mentioned a long snapper. Those dudes are worth their weight in gold to have somebody that's solid and do it both. And then you look at, you know, people have made a lot of money in the pros being able to snap the
Yeah.
ball on time and with accuracy and speed and all. So interesting take there. One player I want to point out, it's not a Carolina football player, but Sydney Barker on the basketball team, the women's basketball team. She could have gone and played somewhere else, but she
Hmm.
was hell bent on playing for Carolina and Courtney Banghart. It's worth reading that story if you get an opportunity to step out of the football men's basketball realm and check out that.
And
She can play, and she's walking on to Carolina over opportunities to play elsewhere. How often does that happen on
but
college football level?
for what?
Somebody can go somewhere else,
Uh-huh.
but they have scholarship offers elsewhere, but they say no. You mentioned earlier, maybe they're just
Yeah, I
dying to
don't
play
it
for a
doesn't
team.
from a percentage standpoint, it doesn't happen very often. Now, I'm sure everyone's like, "Well, what about this guy? What about this guy?" You gotta
Mhm.
remember those situations stick out in your head, so it makes it seem like they happen more frequently than they really do. And the reason why I know this, and this is a good segue to what I was about to get to, is that every year for the past I don't know how many years, I've been doing the Meet the Walk-Ons, which is, a segment that I run in July, so that maybe next week we run it, but we will definitely run it this month. And I could tell you that, I go through, do some research on all those guys, and that the majority of them, as I said, are either specialists or they're kind of those guys who had maybe some D2 offers, maybe some FCS opportunities, but very rarely is it a kid who has some legit offers from like Power Five schools. And sometimes, if it's a kid who has some Power Five offers, usually those opportunities no longer exist, which kind of force them to consider the the um the walk on route to begin with. But to kind of bring it back, we'll kind of break down the new preferred walk ons in soon on Inside Carolina.
Yeah, and folks are mentioning Cole Holcomb in the chat. It's probably one of the Thomas Smith. There's a thread on the message board about him as well. Guys that have walked on, had major success, and Cole Holcomb, um, is big time for the Redskins, or excuse me, the Commanders now. Or I guess he's with the Steelers. Scott
Dude,
Weaver
I
says in the chat.
struggle. I struggle with both the Commanders and oh god,
Guardians.
Guardians. Yes. The
Yes,
other yesterday, we were watching the Phillies game and the guy wanted the Guardians on the next TV. I was like, I had to. Oh, that's right, Indians.
that's an interesting play on words that they use there. Anyway, the Washington Commanders, Cole Holcomb was a big part of. Now I
Yeah.
guess he's with the Steelers. It's tough to keep up with. Um, Don, it's about time to move on to the top
Yes.
5 list. Are we at that point? Are we
Yes.
finished with everything recruiting
I
wise?
think so. We covered a lot of different things,
Yeah. So
more than I anticipated. But
before I get off of that, let me make sure everybody has taken the opportunity to check out all of Don's work with the Shipp commitment. The story up on Malcolm Ziglar's UNC journey comes full circle from the military homecoming that they put on in the Keenan Stadium several years back to him being committed to North Carolina, and then Jordan Shipp. That was a pretty cool day. If you haven't watched those videos, Don and I, along with John Bowman, talked after there as Don and John were on a bench outside of Shipp's school, and we had Shipp and his coach, Chad Greer. Just a good show to pay attention to, and check out the audio of the Ziglar one after this show. Don, top 5 high school, or excuse me, college football games on North Carolina's home schedule that would be the best for a recruiting weekend. You ready?
yes, you want to throw them up there?
I've got a ton, so we'll start at the
Okay.
top. Slee Rat, top 5 home games. Miami, Syracuse, Duke, Minnesota, App State. And just for the record, Campbell and Virginia are the other ones out here. KM Shires didn't give me an order, but we'll go in this. App,
And only give
Miami.
3. Come on, KM Shires,
Yeah,
5. The top
we got
5.
top 5. Derek
Golly.
Morrison, Miami, App State, Minnesota, Duke, and Virginia. And I think it's an interesting. You mentioned this when you were talking about this top 5. It is a big game, but it's also if you're having a monster recruiting weekend, you want your team to win that game as well.
Yeah.
So there's a balance. So like
Yeah.
back in the day when Texas came to Carolina, or when Oklahoma, we talked about that a while back. Oklahoma, I talked with Mark May. When the Sooners came, you don't want to have a monster recruiting day and then you get your lunch handed to you by the opponent's team.
Well,
That is
I think, yeah, you don't want your lunch handed to you. But I will say when I think it was the last time Clemson came to town with Lawrence and
the atmosphere was off the charts.
yes, UNC lost, but I think from a recruiting standpoint, that was awesome. And actually,
Yeah.
that was the game that Drake May actually credits for flipping his mindset about North Carolina, which ultimately led to his commitment switch from Alabama to UNC.
Yeah, great point there. You can lose the game, but you got to show
Yeah,
something.
you don't want to get blown out.
Yeah, you don't want to get
That
raced.
atmosphere would be killed quickly.
Yes. We could do top 5 football atmospheres in Kenan Stadium ever, but I doubt you're going to be able to. You might
Yeah.
just be an observer on that one. I've got a bunch on there.
Although there are a couple, obviously that Geo game, and then
State Geo game.
the first Zero Dark Thursday, or the six in my mind.
That was
I,
epic.
I went to
And
that as a fan and
yeah,
loved it.
yeah. And the way they lost that one sort of summed up the previous era
Yeah.
there. And then Miami, I guess in 19, with the pass to Daz Newsome. That
Yeah.
was off the charts. That Twitter video that somebody posted is one of the best videos of Carolina football atmosphere, of what it was and what it can be on a game by game basis.
Hmm.
That would be on every highlight tape. Anyway, Sean Crowley, top 5 home games: Miami, Duke, App, Virginia, and
Crowley.
Minnesota. He said Crowley.
Yeah.
Right. Preston from Greensboro. Oh, we're going backwards. Make it
Yeah, that's
difficult.
what we could do that.
Syracuse, Minnesota, Virginia, App State, and number 1 Miami. See, Miami's going to be the number 1 thing here.
Okay.
Miami, Duke, Hills 365. Miami, Duke, App, Minnesota, and Virginia. Hunter drops in Miami number 1, Duke, App, Virginia, and Cuse 3. Allen Minton, Miami, Duke, App, Cuse, and Virginia. Money Mark, Miami, Duke, App, Minnesota, Syracuse. And there's a lot more coming in as well, and I'll get to them. But let me ask you, what for you? You
Hmm.
cover recruiting all the time. What do you think would be the biggest game for North Carolina?
Yeah, so I would go with Miami too, and here's the reason why. One, it's Miami. It's gonna be a game that recruits are gonna want to go to. Also, it's a winnable game. And so I'm like everybody else. Miami has always been one of the most talented teams in the nation for decades. But for the past however many decades, a decade or two, um, that talent hasn't been able to transition to wins and losses. So hopefully that's not the case this season too for North Carolina. And this is a win over a team that people are going to view as a good program. And so that's what you want your recruits to go to. Do you want me to just give you mine?
Yeah, give me yours. So Miami's
So
number 1.
Miami's number 1 for me because of those reasons. Winnable game, but it'll be a good atmosphere. It's a good opponent. It's a well-known opponent. Number 2, I have Duke, just because, it's the football rivalry is nowhere close to the basketball rivalry, but it is a big game. The bell afterwards, so hopefully you want to win. But getting the bell afterwards, I think, kind of contributes to the atmosphere, and it's homecoming also, which I think you got to play into. So there'll be a lot of other activities going on campus that you want the recruits to see. Then I struggle a little bit. So I went UVA, another kind of rival. Definitely UNC should whack them pretty well. Although blowing another team out doesn't always give you the best atmosphere. It's great. You'd rather be the one whacking than the one being whacked. But you'll see if that gets ugly really early, like I think, you'll see kids leaving at halftime, which you don't want. Um, and and then I guess I went Syracuse for 4. ACC team, not a lot of hype. My main thing is this. So, well, one, Campbell is going to be boring. The UNC will have a lot of recruits there, but they won't be a whole lot of like big time targets, especially since it's later on in the season. So they'll probably invite a lot of like groups, like a high school team, bring all your recruits sort of thing. So you see a lot of groups there. But the two other games, App and Minnesota, I feel like are dangerous games because App, as we saw last year, as we've seen recently, can beat North Carolina.
Right.
Even though App has never signed a 4-star recruit, App always punches above his weight class, and you don't want, recruits there to witness you losing to a team that's far inferior to you.
Right.
Minnesota, I feel like is you know, I imagine that there could be. I haven't done a whole lot of research for this season, to be honest. But Minnesota's a very good team, very good program, and that could kind of fit into the same category where a lot of people are going to come into this thinking that this is going to be an easy win for North Carolina. They're traveling so far, yada yada. Minnesota doesn't have this great well. I think they do actually have some national championships, like in the early 1900s, sort of thing. But beyond that, doesn't have this great tradition. But recently, they've been pretty good.
Yeah.
And so I don't think a lot of people, if you're not like a diehard college football fan, like like me, watch all the games you possibly can, you might not understand how good they are. And I'm sure some recruits aren't going to understand how good they are. They come in and they see North Carolina lose to a team that they're not expecting to lose, might not be all that great. So those are the, I know I gave 6, but those are the two. I just wanted to point out those are two I feel like are danger games to bring recruits to, just because of some of the unpredictability in there.
Yeah. I mean, I can certainly see the Minnesota game being an overlooked one. They did lose a fair amount off that team last year. There should be no overlooking App State given last year and then a couple years ago in Kenan Stadium. Miami's got to be the game as far as what you want, but I agree with you that Duke, even though it's late in the season, that's going to be a good atmosphere, especially if both teams' record is what folks hope and want them to be. Because I think Duke's going to be pretty good as well. Let me throw
I
up
do.
one last question before we get out of here.
Well, we need your top 5.
I just gave it to you, Miami.
Okay. Okay, my
I
bad.
would say Miami's number one.
Okay.
The lateness of in the season hurts the Duke aspect of it, but I think
Okay.
Duke would be number 2 just on its face. And then I think App State. I mean, there's going to be a ton of App State fans in there. That'll be an interesting deal.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that there's going to be a lot of App State fans in there, and if things go off the tracks, you don't want recruits to see App State fans rooting on App
Yeah,
State in Kenan Stadium. Now, you don't have to worry about that with Minnesota.
yeah. But I mean, I think if North Carolina handles business, App should not. It should not be a game like it was last year, which that atmosphere, I don't know how many people went to that game, but good gracious, that atmosphere was amazing up there. And then Q's in Virginia, I'd probably say Virginia simply because it's more of a traditional rival
Yeah.
and not many people down this way care about Syracuse football a lot, even though, they've been decent. So that's what I would, Campbell, like you mentioned, that's going to be bring everybody. Join us for the family fun game. So Miami definitely number 1. Last
Mhm.
question for the show, and this is a good one, might earn him MVP.
Oh, boy.
Is this one, Don? What do you think plays more importance in selecting the right recruiting weekend for a school? The date, a winnable opponent, or the name of the opponent? I think the date's a big deal, especially with a December signing period.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, so the recruits that you're bringing in aren't going to be 24 recruits. I mean,
That's
they
that.
will
You're right.
they will come, so it'll be 25s is the guys that are going to make the most impact. But what I will say, to your point, that kids are super excited. They'll have this whole schedule mapped out where they're going every weekend, and then midway through, they start to get worn down, like all this traveling on Saturdays after not getting home until after midnight on Friday because they played a high school football game and they're beat up and all that sort of stuff. And then it's expensive, especially if you're going to a lot of different schools, and that wears on a family also. So what you tend to see is that the first few games end up being the most attended by a recruit standpoint, and later on, that's why having the Campbell late is not that big of a deal from a recruiting standpoint, because you probably weren't going to get as many kids as you would early on. But to answer the question, I think I think the name of the opponent, that's what I look at. I think the Miami thing, the whole reason why is because it's Miami. You know what I mean? And we could talk about how bad Miami is and all this sort of stuff, but we talk about prestige. The prestige of Miami is still there, no matter how bad they've been the past, decade plus. That prestige is there, and on top of that, they are very beatable for North Carolina should be favored in that game.
Yeah, and
Unless,
Carolina's owned them in MAC 2.0.
yeah. So
Yeah, and like
you
I
love that.
mentioned, yeah, the atmosphere for that game in the first year was, it was up there for Kenan Stadium in games I've ever been to. Maybe that moment when that touchdown pass was thrown and caught in that fourth down conversion. Maybe the top, definitely top two or three, especially. And I think the Duke game's underrated as well when Chaz Surratt intercepts the pop pass from the running back, one of the dumbest play calls this side of Pete Carroll throwing a pass against the Patriots. Anyway, Don, anything left before we get out of here? It's been a great day. It's been a fun show. It's a quick hour and 6 minutes, man. It flies with you. Shout out to all the people that joined us. Anything left for next week for us to tease for next week or anything on the site? And if folks haven't
No,
checked out the Ziglar story, go check
yeah,
it
the
out
Ziglar
now.
story, which was, I'm sure you didn't get a chance to read because it literally was posted right before, but that's a great story. Definitely check that out. It's free. I believe it's free. So if you're not a premium subscriber, it gives you a taste of what you could potentially get from our premium content. We'll have a couple more items, I think, from this past weekend with the commitments, and then and then coming up at some point we'll have the meet the walk on. So if that's something that truly interests you, and if you're like a huge diehard and really get into the roster stuff, that's that should interest you. We'll have that next week. We should and
Next week
ish.
ish.
I hate to say when, because then if things change, because initially it was supposed to run on Tuesday, this past Tuesday,
Well,
but
you never know what happens. There's a
things
lot. There's a
happen.
lot. Like I told you, have you ever seen a duck? And then have you seen under the water of a duck? And feet are going like crazy, but the duck
Yeah.
seems calm on top. So anyway, shout out to Taylor Vippolis's mailbag. It's up. New Players Lounge is up. Vip and I did with DeAndre Boykins. Of course, Bucks column every day. This show, just tons of stuff on Inside Carolina and on the premium boards. And then we ain't even talked about the basketball side where Sherelle, Sean, Joey kill it on Coast to Coast and all of that work. Sean and Sherelle have been nailing it on the recruiting aspect of it. Anyway, that's Don Callahan. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. I talked about them earlier. Go check them out one way or another. Rate us, review us, subscribe, leave us feedback on the boards, whatever you want. We're in the business of trying to make happen. If you're going to the soccer game tonight in Kenan Stadium, that grass is not staying. That grass will be removed after the soccer game. So don't get your hopes up if you're a grass first person. Don Callahan, I appreciate it, my friend. We'll talk soon.